Hello, and welcome to Morph Minutes, presented by StudioM Financial. StudioM Financial exists to help you change the sound of your money through financial education and coaching. I'm your host, Katrina Pitts, instructor and financial coach. Hey friends, it's Katrina from StudioM, and we have another episode of our Morph Minutes today. We're going to finish out our summer series, and we're going to talk about emergency funds. How do we define them, what they are, how we can use them, what their purpose is all going to be contained in this episode today. So without further ado, let's continue on, and we'll get through our disclaimer, and we'll get into the meat of our discussion today. So our disclaimer is... Our disclaimer is the views and opinions expressed by StudioM Financial representatives are not those of the representatives and do not necessarily reflect the views of StudioM Financial or any of its officials. The information provided in this presentation is for general educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as legal, financial, or individual counsel and advice. Participating in the Your Money Mix series or this mastering series does not establish a financial coach-client relationship. And as I said when we started this is the fourth one of our series today. And again, we've moved up some of the timelines. This will be actually released later on in July instead of September. But this one is Lightening Your Labor, Have an Emergency Fund. So the session objectives, we are going to define what an emergency fund is. We're going to define its purpose. We're going to understand the methods to calculate the baseline. We're going to review the spending plan budget to allocate for funds. And then we're going to talk about options of accounts to hold the emergency fund in. So let's start. What is an emergency fund? It's really a buffer between you and life. And so we have our individual here, and we have a little kind of a line in between this is the emergency fund. And to the right of it, there are things like unexpected medical events, there's job loss, significant automotive repair, family events, pipe burst, a family member, unexpectedly passes and you now have some funeral costs, job loss, you may have gotten laid off or you had to leave your job for other reasons, medical events for yourself or for someone in your family that take more money than maybe what you would, not that you would rather give, but that take money that you would either use for a credit card to pay for it or something that was really just unexpected. It was not part of your monthly budget that you were anticipating using for this particular thing, which is why it's called an emergency. And I don't mean that in a facetious sort of condescending sort of way, but it really, those emergencies are things that we didn't plan for, that we didn't budget for, that we didn't have allocated in our line items in our spending plan. They just kind of happen out of the blue. So how do we actually address them? Because there is an element here that there is life that is happening, life is involved. So how do we actually mitigate and handle those things that come unexpectedly, particularly when they deal with our finances? And so emergency fund is really kind of a little bit of a distance between you and life. So when those things happen, you have something to absorb it so that it's not really a direct and impactful hit. It hits, and certainly it hurts because it's money that you are no longer have available to you, but you have it and you can now address the situation that is facing you. That's what emergency it really is. It's a buffer, it's a go-between, something to absorb events that happen in our lives. So then what's the purpose of it? Exactly what I just said. Number one, it's avoiding accumulating debt. So many times when we talk to our clients and there's things that are happening, we talk through, their budgets and their spending plans, they're tracking their expenses, and we kind of walk through debt because they may come to us and say, one of the things I want to do is to reduce debt, or I want to get rid of this credit card, or I want to do a balance transfer for these different things. And then they start talking about the whys of the credit card balances, why they accumulated the different debt. And many times it's because unexpected things happen and they didn't have any other way to address it. So we pull out the credit card, we spent the $1,500, we spent the $400, we spent the $3,000, we spent the whatever dollars were necessary to address that situation. And so now we have credit card debt that we didn't pay off at the time, right? We paid off at the end of the month. And so now it's accumulating a lot of interest, and that debt is just getting larger and larger and larger. And so sometimes when we get there, there's there's a little bit of a regret, which I understand, but let's not dwell on that, right? You have the credit card debt. We're in the situation. So how do we now get out of it? But one thing that the emergency fund does is to help us avoid that very thing from accumulating debt. It also helps us reduce financial and emotional stress, right? When you know that there's a bucket of money that's set aside, it sort of helps your shoulders go down, your emotions go down. When things happen, you don't have that sort of heart rate that's rising. You don't have that sort of emotional response to it. Again, you still recognize that it's a thing you have to pay and it was unexpected, but you don't have the panic. You don't have the oh my goodness, head and hands kind of a response. You say, okay, the water heater needs to be fixed. We have 10,000 sitting in our account. Okay, now we can address this. Or you know what, the part-time job that we had that we were really kind of using to tide us over for monthly expenses, that part-time job went away, but we do have some money set aside that we can sort of tide ourselves over until we find another opportunity. So really reducing that financial and emotional stress is huge. It doesn't always come across, mathematically, the emotional stress part being reduced, but I guarantee you that it. When those things happen, you do feel a lot more at peace and a lot more calm when those things take place. And then it also prevents a disruption to our household budget. And those things kind of go hand in hand, those first two. We're avoiding accumulating debt, but it also is not impacting our monthly household budget. We're not having to scrape through and figure out what can we not pay this month? Where can we pull back? Where can we adjust to actually fit this in? Your normal household budget can go as necessary because you have this money set aside. And we'll see what that looks like here in a second. Especially if we're talking about job losses, can we actually sort of move our way through those monthly expenses that we need? And how can we calculate what those monthly expenses should be that we want to sort of save up for? So the purpose of it is really to avoid accumulating debt, like I said, reduce financial and emotional stress, but then also prevent disruption to our household budget. So we have a couple of methods to actually calculate it, because we sort of say, okay, well, that's fine. If I need to have an emergency fund, that's great. I don't think anybody would really argue against that point. No, I don't need one. I've never ever heard a person say, no, I refuse to have one. I've heard people say, I've never actually heard of it or what does it mean, but no one has ever actually opposed me on this issue. But really the question that they typically ask is, how much should I have in there? And my answer to them sometimes is, how much would you feel comfortable with? How much do you currently have just in general savings? How much do you actually spend in your monthly budget? And then we start kind of dissecting and really walking through the actual budget. So here's a couple ways that you can calculate just the baseline of what we need. And then we need to figure out how much that actual bucket of money needs to be. There's a couple ways that you can calculate it. The first way is with monthly expenses. And those are the four walls. And you've heard Dave Ramsey talk about this, maybe StudioM in a different couple of ways. These are really the things that actually keep your household going. So if there is a disruption in income, what do you need to actually continue paying for that really makes sure that nothing for you or for your family goes unaccounted for? So things like housing, do we keep a roof over our head? Utilities, do we pay for our electricity, the water, if we have gas as well. So for people who live in certain parts of the country who run on gas, when I lived in Nashville, in one of the apartments, it was a gas powered. There was also electricity, but I had both. And so sometimes during the year, it was heavy on the gas and on the electricity. And other parts of the year is the opposite, heavy on the electricity, low on the gas. So if you have those utilities that actually keep your house powered, you want to make sure that you account for those. And you can kind of either come up with a monthly average, where you kind of understand how those costs fluctuate throughout the year as well, but keeping those things into account. So housing, utilities, food. We need to continue to feed ourselves. You may change how you shop. You may change where you shop. You may adjust that, but you're still going to feed yourself. You may pull back on the number of times that you go out to eat. You may adjust the number of times that you do DoorDash or Uber or whatever, but you still are going to feed you and your family. So you may do, instead of eating out, you may do brown bagged. You may prepare your meals a little bit differently. Whatever that means, you are still feeding your household. So that needs to be accounted for. And then transportation. especially if it's things like job loss, where you may have to go to interviews. I realize virtual interviews are really a thing now, but in case they ask you to come in, you need transportation to do that. And sometimes relying on public transportation, buses, trains that come around the city, public transportation, or even Uber or taxi. There are things that happen with that. So if you need transportation for you or for your family, shuttling your kids around, different things that they still have to and from school, to and from activities, all of these different things that you still have to take care of that require mobility. You want to make sure that you account for that. Car payments, insurance, gas, maintenance, those kinds of things, especially if you do, I know cars probably have more of a longevity when it comes to oil changes and those things, but if you have things like regular maintenance that you've taken for your car, or I don't want to say subscriptions, but just monthly things that you may take in that you're already paying for, or you are currently paying for. There could be a variety of ways to do it, but whatever it is that actually pertains to your vehicle, making sure that you take care of those things. So then when you have that number of what those four walls are, you then have to decide, okay, how much money do I want to set aside based on this monthly number? We'll get to that here in a second, but you really just have to figure out what that looks like in your budget, and then you can make that calculation. And we'll also look at an example here on the next slide. And the second way you can do this is non-discretionary expenses. So these are the things that have known due dates, known amounts, and that non-payment of these things can create some problems. So if we're talking things like our mortgage, right? We need to pay our mortgage. Otherwise, we will start moving in things called foreclosure, and that we want to avoid. Car payments, if we stop paying our car, things like repossession, insurance, even just making sure that you're protected out on the roadways. Not saying that you will get hit or hit somebody, but having insurance coverage could not, let me rephrase that, not having insurance coverage could prove to be problematic should something happen. Also, things like if you still have credit cards that you're paying off, those have known due dates and amounts, but they also can create issues if you don't actually pay those, right? Not just, you have dings on your credit report, but you have interest rate. You have, collections can take place if you just stop paying them. So those things that you want to make sure, if you do this non-discretionary expenses route, that you know that you actually have to pay for every single month, then making sure that you account for those things. Now, what's not included in that are things like food, things like gas. Those are discretionary, right? They fluctuate. They don't have a set date. They don't have a set time. Yes, they are aligned in your budget, but you don't always know. They are due on the 14th. It's due on the 10th. It's due on the 1st. Those are the expenses that you handle in and around those known due dates. So that's sort of the distinction I'm making in my description at the moment. So you have monthly expenses, those four walls, and then you have non-discretionary expenses. So those things that have known due dates, known amounts, and you don't pay for those things or don't keep those things up, it could create some issues down the road. So then the rule of thumb that we kind of talk about is that it's 3 to 6 months of the calculated baseline, 3 to 6 months of expenses, 3 to 6 months of monthly expenses, 3 to 6 months of non-discretionary expenses. And you'll see there's little variation in what the actual number turns to be, but we can look at that here in a second. So then once you figure out what that baseline number is, then you can multiply that by the 3, the 4, the 5, the 2, the 6, the whatever, to figure out what that actual bucket of money should be that you would like to save for. So let's actually look at this budget. And so we have one of our hypothetical clients. I like to do these things. I like to bring actual visuals and numbers. I don't want to just view theories. I want to actually bring those theories and so you can see what it looks like in practical, actual numbers for a budget. So we have our hypothetical client here. Her name is Marin. Marin has her monthly income of about $750 a month. So this is her spending plan, all the things that are put in there. This is what she thinks is going to happen throughout this month. So we have our mortgage, utilities, our cell phone, transportation, insurance. We have a couple of credit cards, internet, gas, and food. And then we have this sort of below the line. So we have charitable giving. And for some people, that's above the line. For me, it's above the line. For right now, for Marin, it's below the line. Charitable giving, we have hair, personal care. That's below the line. For me, that's also above the line. Trust me. Entertainment. And then she has a Netflix and a YouTube subscription. And then she has a monthly watch subscription. There's a couple of things that she has in her budget. Now, if we were looking at the actual monthly expenses, those four walls that we talked about, we would include things her mortgage, her utilities, her cell phone. It's 2025, so let's be realistic. A cell phone is very much necessary. Nobody has a landline. Well, I won't say nobody. Probably less than 2% of the population have landlines these days. So most people communicate by cell phone. Transportation, she has a car payment that needs to be kept up. Insurance needs to be kept up. And she has a couple of credit cards as well. And then gas and food. So she is taking care of the four walls. She's taking care of her housing, her utilities, her transportation, and her food, and also the debt that she's paying off with her credit cards. And all of that is about $3,400 a month. It's $3,419. We're just going to round it down to $3,400. So for her, Maren could say, okay, if I wanted to know what my target is, I have a target of either 3 months, and that's 10,200, or I have a target of 6 months, and that's 20,400, or somewhere in between. And we'll talk about some of those variances and those things that could factor in that what number you want to target for your emergency fund. Now, if we're looking at the non-discretionary expenses, so what we have taken out of that is gas and food. We have taken those dollar amounts out at the moment because they do not have a set day, set amount. They fluctuate throughout the month. There is a line item, yes, but they do not have a set date that they are due. So we took gas and food out, and we actually also took these things out at the bottom. So I want you to see a note here. It says, no, calculation does not include everything. When you are making your baseline, it is not, I must cover everything in my budget. It's really, what are those things that will actually are necessary to maintain your home? Church giving, it doesn't support, your household or those things. Again, people feel differently about those things, and that is fine. If charitable giving is above the line for you, by all means, put it above the line and maintain it. I totally understand that one way or the other. Parent personal care, some level of entertainment, your subscriptions to YouTube and Netflix are not going to maintain your household, but if it's of the utmost importance for you just to have some sort of outlet for life, I do understand that, but just be very, very, very cognizant of what those true discretionary expenditures are, because otherwise it's just going to increase the target amount that you actually are aiming for your emergency fund. But so there's non-discretionary expenses. So it's about $2,800, and because we took out the gas, we took out the food. So for 3 months, Maren's target would be $8,400. For 6 months, Maren's target would be $16,800, or somewhere in between. So this is how you would create your baseline. You would look at your actual budget. You would start marking those things that are either four walls or things that have an actual due date. Now, I understand what you're probably going to say is, well, Katrina, there's a due date for Netflix and YouTube. Yes. However, is there an issue if those things are canceled and are no longer a part of your budget? No, there is no negative consequence, financially negative consequence, liability, negative liability. I don't even say that. A liability issue, negative consequence if you do not have those subscriptions. So that's really the difference. Yes, they have a date and a time, but that other part was if you don't pay those, there can be challenges and issues that are brought about as a result of that. So those subscriptions don't really fit into that second part of that category. So again, calculation does not include everything. So those are the two ways that we did it. And then we decided 3 to 6 months of those 3 to 6 months of those expenses. So let's look at a couple of ways that we can allocate. So we have assess available funds in your spending plan, which we did. So let me go back for one quick second. So Maren in her budget, I didn't point this out, but Maren in her budget has about $700, $770 remaining in her budget. Now, does she want to use all of that to start building up her savings fund? Maybe. It really depends on what her other goals are that she has in her mind and what she would like to accomplish. But for right now, we're not going to actually address the full and actual dollar amount that she's going to set aside, but we know that we actually have about $770 available in her budget to start saving and start putting away for her emergency fund. So we need to assess the available funds in the spending plan, which we just did. And then we can use these savings calculators to help determine the amount and the length of savings, meaning what's the amount that we're going to go for the 3 to 6 months, and how long will it take us to actually get there. So on the right hand side of this slide, I have listed out 4 different websites, and there's actually hyperlinks within those for the words. If you click on NerdWallet, it will send you to the actual website, to the actual savings calculator page. So I even did a little more of a favor for you. I actually bookmark the page for the savings calculator. But if you go to NerdWallet or Bankrate or Dinkytown or Smart Asset, none of these people are not sponsored. They're not sponsored for me. They're not a partner for me. They're just websites that I personally use to do this exact same thing for myself and for others. And they work really, really well. And they kind of help you gauge target timeline, amounts, and you can kind of toggle along with, if I want to save more, how much do I need to save? If I want to save less, how much do I need to save? How long will it take me? All of those things. So you can use these savings calculators to help you determine the amount. How much do I want to save, but also the length of time. Is it going to take me 5 years, 2 years? But you also have this interest rate that you can put in there, which is also kind of what we're going to get to here in a second. And you can determine the bank account for those emergency funds. Where do you actually want to put this money so that you can get access to it when you need it? So when you get to those savings calculators, it's going to ask you for the interest rate. And that information is very, very important because depending upon the kind of savings account that you choose, that interest rate is going to vary. So let's look at that for one quick second. So I went into actually what account do we want to put that emergency fund in? So we have a couple of different options that I want to talk through here briefly. So we have the traditional checking account. So just like one at Bank of America or Chase or Capital One, any credit union that have it's just a straight checking account. It is a non-interest bearing account, which means you put $200 in at the end of the month, provided that there's no bank fees that are associated with that bank account. You're going to have $200 at the end of the month. There's nothing gained, nothing lost. 200 is 200 is 200. So you can do a traditional checking account. The challenge with that is because it is a non-interest account, you're not accruing money faster. It really is just dollar for dollar, whatever you put in. It's less than ideal option. That's all you have available to you, then sure, do it. But if you have these other ones that are available to you, which most banks do and most credit unions do, I'd be shocked if there was a financial institution that did not have anything outside of a checking account. So you can just sort of move on to the next one. So you have your traditional savings account. And by traditional, I mean it is still interest bearing, but it is not the high yield, which we'll talk about here in a second. So your savings account, I haven't actually looked at it for today. I probably should have, but it could be anywhere from 0.3% to 0.5%. It's not going to be a significant amount. It's not going to, you're not going to feel like you won the lottery. You're not going to feel like you can retire in 3 years. It's just giving you a little bit of extra money every single month, and it's compounding. So it's not just at the end of the year, here's your 17 cents because it was 3% for all the end of the year. But you do get at least a little bit of interest on your money. It's not going to keep up with inflation. It's not going to keep up with the price of goods, but you are at least gaining some. So traditional savings account. So then you can move to a different savings account, and it's called a high yield savings account. And it is interest bearing online. So you can be online or brick and mortar, but they typically have, as the name suggests, a higher yield. So a higher APY, so an annual percentage rate, APY. That is money working for you. APR is money working against you, as interest that is being attached to some sort of debt product. APY is money that's working for you. So you want as high of an APY as you can get. So these high yield savings account, they could be anywhere to 4%, 4.5%. Mine that I have currently, I think it started at maybe 4.8, and it's reduced a little bit over the last 8 to 10 months or so, but I think we're still right around 4.2, 4.4, somewhere in there. So over 4% that you can get, which again, if your traditional savings account is giving you 0.3, 0.4, anything that's to the left of that decimal is a huge improvement over that traditional savings account. So 3%, 3.5%, 4%, whichever. Looking and researching that. And I did put it in this presentation, but I will drop it into the comments. that you can go to Smart Asset or you can go to nerdwallet.com. You can actually compare savings accounts and they will line up for you all the different options online or brick and mortar. And they will list, this is what I'm trying to say. They will list all of the individual interest rates that are for those specific savings accounts. So you can look to see what the minimum deposit is, anywhere from 0 to 5,000, 10,000, depending upon the kind of account that you're looking at. You can look for that and you will look for the interest rate. So you can compare how much do I actually have to deposit, how much is the APY, and which one works best for me. FDIC protected, non-FDIC protected, and kind of go from there. So high yield savings account, interest bearing, online or brick and mortar. If you find one that's online, you will typically have a higher yield because they're not having to pay for the overhead of having an actual physical location. So just keep that in mind. And then you have the money market or certificate of deposit. Also kind of put that in the same category as like your checking account or maybe your savings account. But the difference here for money market and certificate of deposit, how much access can you have to those funds throughout the month? How many times can you withdraw money? And when can you withdraw money? Because for the certificate of deposit, it's going to have a term date to it. 6 months, 3 months, 18 months, whatever it is. That if you withdraw that money sooner than that, you are going to pay some sort of penalty. It could be percentage, it varies by certificate, but you have limitations on when you can get access to that money. So let's say you put it in your certificate of deposit, that's fine, but it's a 12-month term. Let's say that you have, we can go back to the water heater. The water heater goes out and it's month 4. Okay, well, if you want to withdraw the money, they're not going to stop. They're just going to penalize you, and they will put a fee attached to that actual withdrawal. So just be on the lookout keep those things in mind of what's the penalty, right? What it's going to cost me to take this out earlier than what I determined and what I thought I was going to need it. So for money market, same thing. How many times can you withdraw? Sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's fewer times in the month. Again, hopefully you're not having emergencies that regularly throughout a month, but just being mindful that there may be restrictions to the access that you have to those accounts. So those are the different options: traditional checking, traditional savings, traditional checking, non-interest bearing, traditional savings, interest bearing, but pretty low interest, high yield savings account, higher interest, still interest bearing, but higher. And then your money market, certificate deposit, both interest bearing, but there could be some withdrawal terms that you need to be aware of. So let's leave you with some action steps. We're wrapping this up pretty quickly. So hopefully this has been helpful for you to give you some practical guidance, not just concepts, and practical things to consider when you are trying to determine what your emergency fund should be. So these are things that we can do. There's 4 steps. The first one is calculate the expenses. So that's what we did at the very, very beginning. We looked at 4 walls. We looked at non-discretionary. Which one makes the most sense? How much do I want to actually cover in my budget in those times where I need to saving, and how much do I want to save if I ever need to access those funds? So which expenses do I want or need to include in this calculation? Again, not all of them will be included. So which ones do I actually want to include? Is employment. This is one of the things that I wanted to get to. Is employment or income stable, unstable, or does it fluctuate? So do you have massive sort of seasonal swing that you need to account in those leaner times, so that when you have those leaner times, you have money set aside that you can utilize? So if your employment is stable, you've been there for 5 years, you can be there for another 15 years, and you have pretty solid confidence that this is a place that you want to be and a place that you can stay, then maybe you reduce it down to maybe 3 months or maybe 2 months, or sort of the lower end of that spectrum. But if you have money that's unstable, if you are commission based, if you are kind of a fee based that you do by project and you're freelancing, or you have fluctuating income, again seasonal, how do you actually account for that? How do you make sure that you have enough money set aside to tide you over those lean times until you get back to those times that are a little bit more prosperous for you? So then you calculate that baseline, and then you actually do the math for it. 3 months, 6 months. You may even want to go all the way up to 12 months, especially if you're seasonal or fluctuating. You may want to consider that. You don't just have to do 3 to 6. You can certainly do more if that makes more sense for your family and your household. So then you allocate those. This is part two. So you allocate the savings goal. How much do I need to save? That's right coming out of that. You set the baseline. Now determine how many months you want to save. Now, keeping this in mind, if 3 months feels like a really heavy lift for you, it's 6,000, it's 10,000, it's 15,000. That seems really, you know, and that's a lot of money. Okay, then where can we start? What's an actual achievable goal that you can do? Is that 1,000? Is that 5,000? Is that 2,500? What is that number that you can reach where you just kind of go, okay, I don't have the full 15,000. I don't have the full 10,000. I don't have the full 20,000, but I do feel like I have a little bit of a buffer between me and life. It will grow. There will be more padding there. There will be more absorption there for you, but you at least have something now that will tide you through. So you get to decide how much that is. And maybe, I will say this also, maybe that's an opportunity for you to go back and reassess how much money is actually in that budget. Is there anything else that I can maybe adjust, or is that really what the number is? Did that subscription is really necessary? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if that number is pretty eye-popping for you, then maybe go back and reevaluate what that actual number is that you want to cover, and then kind of go from there. So then determine the amount, determine the account. So you see the account for the emergency fund that goes back to our checking, our traditional savings, money market, CD, high yield savings account. Where do you actually want that money to go? And do you want to have a card for you to access those funds? And if you are one that sometimes feels like you would dip into that savings account for things that are savings and emergency fund related, maybe not having immediate access by a card, that may be a better option for you. So sometimes you can choose whether or not the card attached to that savings account. It's not always a default, but definitely check to see if you know that you are a person that will struggle, and be honest with yourself. And if that's the case, fine. But be honest with yourself. If you would struggle with stopping access and not, dipping into it for non-emergency things, maybe a solution is to not have a debit card that has access, that you can get easy access to that. So you can start growing and building that balance a little bit faster, a little bit easier. So then the last one, this is pretty important, start saving. Actually, you've done the work. When the thing that you can do for yourself is going through all that work, you can actually start saving. So set up auto deposit or auto withdrawal, maybe from your paycheck, direct deposit, the majority of your check, but set an amount, that needs to come out and goes directly to another account that you never see, that you never have to account for. So when you're budgeting, you may just be budgeting off the net of that. So figure that out and actually start saving. Take a load off of your mind and your emotions, because you recognize and you are truly doing yourself a favor. This is for you. It's called take a load off. Get an emergency fund. Take a load off your mind. Take a load off your emotions. Take a load off of your finances. And you can say, well, Katrina, how am I taking a load off my finances if I'm saving for money? Because I promise you, I've done this before. I've been so thankful for those times where I've had that emergency fund or that separate savings for when maintenance comes, when things come that I need to pay for that are not a part of my normal budget. I have money to take care of it. And I just say, okay, go and do the work. And I feel so much better. I don't love $3,000 going out of my pocket. What I love is the fact that it is not so burdensome on me and my household, but I just carry around a lot of heavy weight of how are we going to do this? How is this going to work? How is this going to happen? You are doing yourself a favor by building up an emergency fund. I cannot stress that enough. Do yourself a favor. So when you hear this, please take consideration. Please take it to heart. Please really give some thought to how this can work for you and for your family. So hopefully, I know this has been quick, but the quick 30 minutes going by, but hopefully this has been helpful to you. And maybe just a reminder, maybe a different tool, maybe a different thing, or maybe it's repetitive, something you've heard before. And sometimes in repetition, you actually are motivated to do things. So hopefully I would love to know that, yes, maybe this is repetitive, but it's now sinking in and you are now moving into action on what to do. And that you can, text us and call us and say, Katrina, I listened to your podcast, 6 months ago, and I'm happy to say that I've started. It was the mood that I needed. It was the motivation and the call to action that I needed to actually sit down and actually put this to practice for me and for my family. And I feel so good, feel so accomplished by having $1,000 set aside. And we will celebrate with you. because we are doing that from the sidelines. And hopefully we are doing that next to you. So you can call us, you can text, you can email us. I will go to the contact page. There you go. You can connect with us through Instagram, through LinkedIn. You can text us, go to the website. You can email us at let's talk at StudioMFinancial.net. Please communicate with us or drop it in the comment section to let us know what you think about it. And I will post this when it goes up on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to, encourage that as well, as we continue to put out podcasts and continue to put out content, that you will be aware of it. But I will also put the presentation and the companion worksheet that goes along with this, so you can take some notes if that is of any interest to you. And with that, we will sign off for this episode. And so thankful, so very thankful for your time. I mean that with all of my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And as I say, until we meet, keep working on the change. We at StudioM Financial appreciate you for taking time out of your day to listen to us. If you have any comments or questions related to today's content, please feel free to send those our way. The email address is letstalk@studiomfinancial.net, or you can connect with us on social media. If you would like to be notified of future podcasts, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, StudioM Financial. As always, until we meet, keep working on the change.